So once upon a time in a land far away, there lived a young man. We actually don't really know too much about this man. We know that he had an older brother. We know that he had a dad. We know that they were farmers. We know that the family did own some land, and they were probably pretty well off. Now, if you grew up on a farm, you know about farm life. It's tough. It can be very good, but it's tough. If you have animals, it's a 365 day per year proposition. There's early mornings, there's lots of lifting, so he would have been used to that. Now, we don't know how old he is. I would probably put him in his early 20s, maybe his mid 20s. And he was bored one night. This was about 2,000 years ago, so there was only one social media platform at the time, Facebook, and he got on Facebook and he looked and he saw that people in Damascus and Jerusalem and Athens were having a lot of fun. They would get all this really cool stuff and go to these cool places that he didn't get to living on the farm in Israel. So he was wondering about this type of life, and it just seemed really enticing to him. And he's doing the math in his head, and he's thinking, I got to save up this much for this long to have this type of lifestyle. And instant gratification was an issue back then, just like it is today. So we don't know exactly why what happened. I think one possibility is he looked at his older brother, and the older brother back then, that was the play. That was what you needed to do, is be the older brother, because they would get the lion's share of the family wealth. They would be the one who would be in power, and it made sense. I mean, back then, the oldest was the one who cared for the parents when they could no longer care for themselves. The oldest would be responsible for all the sisters in the family if they were sisters. If someone wouldn't take care of them, it was the older brother's responsibility. Maybe there was some deep conflict with his dad. I think that was a possibility as well. Maybe there's some kind of argument that we don't know about, and they just got in a fight, or maybe, just maybe, Damascus or Jerusalem or Athens was just too enticing. And then one day he does what all of us would think is unthinkable. He has a conversation with his dad. And it is the most awkward conversation ever. He's like, Dad, I just don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to live here. I don't want to work on this farm. I don't even want a relationship with you or the older brother anymore. So what I'd like you to do is, give me my inheritance now. I don't want to wait until you die. Let's just take care of this. Now, can you imagine this conversation? I got 2 sons. If one of my sons did this to me, here's how I would not feel frustrated. I wouldn't be angry. I'd be heartbroken. That'd be my natural reaction, that my son cares more about my stuff than my son cares about me. It's like, Dad, it's been cool. Thanks for 18 years. Thanks for 22 years. But, can you give me my part of the estate and I'll be on my way? So my older son, Benjamin, he's almost 17 these days. He'll probably be around the house for another 18 months or so, and he's going to be going to college. And I cannot imagine Benjamin coming up to me and saying, Dad, thanks for everything. Can I get my part of the estate? I'm going to move to the East Coast. Heartbroken, right? Now, he would be very disappointed. I mean, he'd make Ohio, and he'd run out of money. His dad's a pastor, not a wealthy landowner. A couple $100 might buy him a few tanks of gas and a meal in a hotel, but that's about it. Man, I could not imagine that conversation. And another thing about this story, I've read this story hundreds of times. Another thing about this story that I was thinking about this morning, why here? That would be unthinkable for any of us to give, the share of the estate to one of our young kids who's more interested in our stuff than us. We're no thanks, but no thanks. This is the most ridiculous request I've ever got. But here, the landowner does it. Now, you have to know something about the landowner here. This is in Luke chapter 15. So at first there's a story about a lost coin, then there's a story about a lost sheep, and then he tells a story about the lost son. But before all this happens, Jesus is talking to some Pharisees here, and he says, "What I want you to know, that the kingdom of heaven is like a father who has two sons." So this is actually God that dishes out the money. Now, God here is not enabling the younger son. He's not being generous. What I believe the father is doing in this story is he is teaching him a very expensive lesson that will turn out to be absolutely priceless. And sometimes to get to priceless, you gotta go through expensive. So the dad, he opens up his calculator app on his new iPhone. It was the iPhone 1. And he says, okay, the land is worth this, the pigs are worth this, the cows are worth this, the goats are worth this, the house is worth this, and that money I invested in Google is worth this. And then he writes out a check. And now the kid doesn't get half. If you ever thought the kid gets half of it, you're wrong. He doesn't. He gets about a third. He might get as low as 25% because the older brother would get the lion's share of it. But let's just say he got a third of a lot. That's still a lot. Now next, what happens is, and the Bible says it's just a few days. It's just a few days that the younger son says his goodbyes and he goes on his way. Maybe it was to Jerusalem, maybe it was to Damascus. Let's just say it was Athens. And he gets to Athens and he rents a suite at the embassy suites overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. He eats that big breakfast every morning. He eats at expensive restaurants at lunch and at night. He goes to the sporting events. He goes to the concerts. He goes to nightclubs when all that stuff is done. He probably throws his money around and tries to impress people, probably especially women. The early translators of the Greek into English, these people would have worked for the king in England or in the UK. They gave this person a name, and you know this person's name when I say it especially. They called him the Prodigal Son. Jesus never gives him a name, but the translators, they call him the Prodigal Son. So prodigal, if you look up in the dictionary, it means wasteful. It means basically like you're just blowing money on this lavish luxury lifestyle that's well beyond your means. That's what prodigal means. So he becomes probably the most well-known person in literary history. I don't think there's probably a close second place either. There's hundreds of books that have been written about the prodigal son. I read one of them this week. There's a painting. It's probably one of the most 5 famous paintings in the world by an artist, Rembrandt, a Dutch painter in the 1600s. I was at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Russia, back in 2016, and I had no idea I was going to walk into this room, and I walked into the room, and there it was. There was Rembrandt's masterpiece, and it jumped out at all of us who got to see it. Just stared. You just stared at this amazing, beautiful painting. Yeah, there's a songwriter, Mick Jagger, from the Rolling Stones. Y'all remember him? Back in the old days. They had the iPhone 2 back then, and he wrote a song. You know what it's called? It's called The Prodigal Son. The Prodigal Son has affected generations and generations of people and will continue to do so in the future. Now, there are so many stories in the Bible, and you've heard me tell hundreds of stories, but there is not a single story in all the scriptures that captivate as many minds and as many hearts as the story of the prodigal son. And the reason why is there's a prodigal. There's a prodigal son, there's a prodigal daughter, in basically all of us. The reason that we are prodigals, it varies from one person to the next. But look on the screen behind me. We are the prodigal every time we search for unconditional love where it cannot be found. So some of us, it might be like these pills that we take. These pills can't keep the promises that they make. For some it might be our position in life. For some it might be the food we eat that comforts us. It could be the fluids we drink that numb the pain. For some it might be these serving gods of comfort and control. Maybe life can be easy. Maybe life can be the way that we want it to be, but these gods, like the other gods, cannot keep the promises that they make. For others, it might be sex, it could be success, it could be money, it could be materials, it could be anything. Any place, anyone that we seek unconditional love, where real love cannot be found. Now, what happens is the prodigal, and us as well, we'll discover that one day we have trusted our lives and we have trusted our salvation, not to the Creator, but to the Creator's creation. So it didn't take the prodigal very long to run out of money. We don't know how long. My guess is he probably lived well for a few years. Now, he's not the first person to make this mistake. There was many before him, and he's not the last. There's many that have come since. His gods of pleasure and prosperity, they predictably and relentlessly disappointed him. Now, to make matters worse, the Bible tells us in the Gospel of Luke that all of a sudden now there's a drought and there's a famine in the land, and like all of a sudden things went from bad to worse for him. So what he did is he applied for a job at a pig farm. That was the one thing that he was capable of doing. Now, I'm from Pocahontas County in northwest Iowa. Anyone ever been there before? Yeah, good. Few people. You're actually from there, right? Yeah. So there's, if you believe, there's 7,200 people that live in Pocahontas County still. I looked it up on Wikipedia this morning. It's got to be true. And I would say it's pretty true. There's like 2 or 3 towns and a lot of farmers. And guess how many pigs live in Pocahontas County? Just random guess, anybody? So it's 500,000 pigs are in Pocahontas County. So I come to you as an expert on pigs. You didn't know that about me, but I know something about pigs. So I'll tell you there's 2 good things about pigs. Pigs are like really cute when they're little. Like, they're just cute. There's no way around that. And then there's bacon. Bacon's a good thing. Vegans, vegetarians, I'm sorry, bacon is a good thing. But man, pigs do not smell the best. Pigs do not behave. And insects are all over pigs, and when it's hot, it's bad. When it's cold, it's bad. So this man found himself feeding these pigs, and Jesus, as he tells his story, says he just longed. He just desired to be eating the food that he was feeding the pigs. So we have a name for something like this. We would call this rock bottom. That's like his low point. It doesn't really get much lower than that. And there's other names too. Rock bottom has relatives. And although you may not have hit rock bottom before, you do know rock bottom siblings. You know rock bottom's cousins. Some of us have been desperate. We've been lost. We've been alone. We've been afraid. We've been unfulfilled. Because the gods that we have chased down ultimately could not and did not keep their promises. Now, he remembered, Luke says, that his dad was a fair man. He knew that his dad would be at least fair, and he says, instead of feeding these pigs here, I could actually go to my dad's house and he would give me a job. Things probably wouldn't be the way they used to be, but I think he would at least take care of me. So you know what he had to do? He had to start walking. And the road that he had to travel on between Athens or Damascus or Jerusalem, wherever it was the same road. The road's called humility. And with humility, he walked to the destination. The destination was home, his one true home. So on Friday and Saturday, it's like yesterday and 2 days ago, I I judged 10 debates at Millard North High School. So I always thought, like, when Benjamin was a little kid, like in high school, like, as I served the team, and I just wanted to be active in what he does. I thought I'd be like keeping score at a baseball game or moving the chains at a football game, and he chose debate, so I was judging debates the last few days at Millard North. Now, there was 72 entries in my division. The best I could tell is I looked at the scorecards. I judged debaters from 14 different states. Now, the ninth debate was by far the toughest one for me. So how they do it is they have these rounds where they do 6 rounds, so all these debaters debate each other, and so after the 6 rounds, they take the 32 teams with the best record, and they put them in a bracket. So the 7th round, it's down to 16. The 8th round is down to 8. Now in the 9th round, it's down to 4. And I have no idea why I'm still judging at this point. I've never done this before. There's like legit certified judges, and they just kept giving me ballots. So at the end of the 9th debate, the little classroom was just jam-packed full of people, probably like 30, 40 people in that little classroom. Now the winner of the semifinal would get a ticket to the national tournament. The loser goes home without that ticket. So the reason this was so tough for me is because my son has been in that bid round 3 times, and 3 times he's lost. So like I've heard his disappointment. I've seen it on his face. Like, I got to tell 2 of these people some really good news, that their team was gonna go to the national tournament champions in Kentucky, and I got to tell the other team that no, you didn't make it. So they got done. All the debates were on the capital gains tax, whether we should have it or not. So if you want to talk about the capital gains tax after church, don't come to me, because I never want to hear those 2 words again. I really don't care what the government does. Like, I'm a pastor. I don't have capital to have gains. So I looked at my sheet, and like I had 2 pages of notes. I looked at the debaters. So I was about 60-40. I thought one team had done a really good job of disproving the other people's case. I didn't think they did a great job with theirs, but they did better than the other team. And there was 2 teams. One was public school in Tempe, Arizona. The other was a private school from Minneapolis. So I signed it, wrote the winner down. They came and got my ballot, took it away. And I explained the reason for my decision. I didn't explain what my decision was. I said, you guys did great here, you guys did great here. Not so much here, I would have done this differently. And then I got to tell the good news to 2 people. I said, I'm gonna give this to the AF. Blake, y'all win. And then I looked over at Corona del Sol. That was the team from Arizona. I saw the disappointment on their face. I just hated it. Like, I was the most miserable person in the room, probably not as much as the debaters, but I was a close second. Because my kid's been there before, and like, that's the way we live. We live in a world where there's judgment. People tell us how good we are. They tell us if we're successful. They tell us how we stack up to everybody else. Now, the prodigal, as he walked down Humility Roadway toward his destination of home, he knew this was the world, the way the world operated. He knew that judgment was in his future. Now, this judgment wasn't going to be as bad as what he experienced, but he knew that judgment was still in his future. Now, if you got your phone, you might want to take a picture of this verse. Like, I love this one. So in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, verse 20, so he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son. He embraced him and he kissed him. Now, if any of y'all ever find a more beautiful, a more powerful Bible verse than that, show it to me. I'd love to read it and just be encouraged by it and experience it, because I've never found one that is better than what you see behind me. So I stared at this painting in St. Petersburg, and Russians don't trust Americans. They don't let me stay in there. I was there for 2 minutes, and they moved me on. Americans don't trust Russians either, apparently, so it's all good. But this is where Rembrandt painted the picture. This was the verse. It wasn't about him feeding pigs. It wasn't about him asking for his money. It wasn't about for the festivities that were about to happen. This is the picture that Rembrandt painted. So listen to this one. His father saw him coming. Have you ever looked out a window or been on your patio and you're waiting for someone to come home? That's what he was doing. And he was gone for a while. We don't know how long. He was gone for at least 6 months, at least a year, probably more. And he was still looking. He was still hoping that his son, who took 1/3 of the assets, would come home. That's the love of the Father. Yeah, and then he saw him. His heart raced. And listen to what the Bible says next. He was full of what? He was full of love and compassion. He was not full of judgment. He was not full of, I told you so. He's not full of, what the heck are you doing here? He's full of love and compassion. So look at what happens. Look at what happens next. He ran to the son. He didn't wait on the patio. He didn't wait in the kitchen. He didn't walk. It was not acceptable for a Jewish man in this culture to run, but he ran. He ran because his son, who was once lost, is now found. Now the world tells us that the father should judge the son because that is the way the world operates. But Jesus tells us the way that the kingdom of heaven operates. Here the father shows the son and all his future sons and daughters who will ever hear this story that the kingdom of heaven is different from the way the world operates. So listen to this night. He embraces his son. He kisses his son. And people make fun of Tom Brady for kissing his 11-year-old boy. This is how it works. He's so excited. He embraces and he kisses his son. He doesn't. Here's the deal. When this type of love exists, cultural expectations, they're out the window. All the judgment, all the I told you so, it doesn't matter anymore. So now there's people that are gathering around. And here's what happens next in the Gospel of Luke. But his father said to the servants, "Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf that we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For the son of mine was dead, and now he's returned to life. He was lost, but now he's found, so let the party begin." So we're in the middle of a series right now called Sometimes It Takes a Party. So last week we looked at Jesus at a party. It was a wedding feast where they ran out of wine, and Jesus turned water into wine. Now Jesus didn't turn water into wine so that people could drink more. Jesus turned water into wine because the party wasn't over. There are still new relationships that need to be started. There's existing relationships that need to be strengthened. So it took a party, and Jesus showed us why we have these parties. And now we know almost nothing about the party that's about to happen. We only really know 3 things. One is that they had veal. It was a calf. It wasn't a cattle. It wasn't beef yet. It was veal. This is the best thing you could have. If you're going to have something great at a party, you have veal. Now, later in the story, we're not going to cover this part this morning, but we also know that there's music and there's dancing. That's the only 3 things we know about the party. And it's the only 3 things we need to know about the party because you don't need to know anything about the party. The only thing we need to know this morning is why they're having a party. And the reason why Jesus says this party exists is to show people who party too much and too hard and for too long. To demonstrate to all of us prodigals who have ever trusted in anything or anyone other than our living God, that we are invited to the party. And not only are we invited to the party, we are the reason for the party when we return to him. For all of us prodigal sons and all of us prodigal daughters, We are not excluded from the party. We are the reason for the party. We were once lost, and now we are found. Now, whatever the God is that is competing for the primary place in your heart, whether it's control or comfort or success or sex or money or whatever it is, it's time to leave that distant land and travel this road called humility to our one true and everlasting home. There is no sin that exists for all of us prodigals, for any of us that think that we've messed up too much. For all of us prodigals, there's no sin that exists that God's love cannot pardon. None of our transgressions are a match for God's grace. So I was talking to this guy, his name's Bob Mabry. Bob was in the early part of our project, one of our architects. Our architect company is BCDM, he's the M part. And he asked me, like, we just had a conversation. He says, Craig, what's one thing you just can't imagine our church without? And I think he was thinking about, like, an office or something in the sanctuary. It may sound like water feature. I think he was thinking for something like that. And I didn't have to think about it very long because I'd thought about it before. And I said, Bob, we need big doors. And he's an architect. It's like accessibility, like for everybody. And that's what the accessibility is cool. And we'll follow those regulations and hopefully even do better. But now the reason that we'll have the big doors is because the kingdom of heaven has really big doors. There was a man one time, and he saw his son who was a complete and utter failure by the world's standards. He had messed up, he had hurt people. And that son one day returned home. And the father was like looking for the son, and he was so excited he was there, and he ran, he hugged him, and he kissed him, and he gave him clothes and food, and he threw a party. And I want everyone that walks by, everyone that drives by, everyone that rides by on Harrison Street to see these really big doors. Our church is going to have big doors because the kingdom of heaven has these really big doors. And when you walk through those first set of doors, you're going to see the sanctuary, and you're going to see the three biggest doors that you've ever seen in a church before. Now, these have a practical function, but there's a spiritual, theological function behind them. That everybody, and I told Bob, I said, everybody, and everybody means anybody, is welcome in these doors. The prodigals, all of us who have made mistakes, all of us who have trusted other gods, every single one of us, every last one of us is welcome to the church because every last one of us is welcomed in the kingdom. So we got something over there on this table, and this is how we're going to close this worship experience this morning. You're going to see this again in 4 weeks. You'll never see it here at Millard West again, but you'll see it in 4 weeks. And there's a bunch of pens and markers over there, and what I want to do is, for any of you who feel like a prodigal, any who have left and been welcomed back by God's grace, any of us who may be there now, maybe we feel in the distant land, and maybe we feel as of this morning it's time to take that road called humility and go to our one true home. What I want us to do, and I'm guessing this is going to be most of us, if not all of us, is go sign your name on that big banner over there that says welcome home, because it's time for us to come home. It's time to come to home to our Father, who's not going to judge us, but who's going to welcome us with his grace. So let's pray. Lord, I just come to you right now, and I just pray for all of us prodigals who have trusted in something or someone other than you. God, if we've returned home and we've experienced your grace, we just thank you for the love that was personified in Jesus Christ who told this story. Lord, I want to pray right now for anybody in those distant lands. Like we're we're separated from you. Our life is unfulfilling. Maybe we're alone. Maybe we're afraid. God, I pray that you will just restore us and bring us into a closer relationship with you. God, we thank you for our place in your church. Lord, help us. Help us to just enjoy and love and embrace this party that you're throwing for us, because we were once lost and we're now found. So God, we come to you and we pray in one voice the prayer that you taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.